that leads us to today's panel, Building and Utilizing Effective Boards. For me, it's of interest because I've been on a number of boards, I've formed a number of boards, I've seen both the pros and the cons, I've seen boards functioning effectively, some not so effective, maybe even dysfunctional. However, some of it is the operating of the board, the other side of it is building the board, so I have a great panel assembled here to share some insights on that subject. And I'm going to quickly go down and introduce everyone, and then we'll give them a little chance to introduce themselves. So immediately to my left, and we'll work down the table, Esperanza Guerrero Anderson is president of Guerrero Anderson, Inc. Jim Hickey is president and CEO of Fraxis. Sven Wehrwein is a board consultant and kind of a professional board member. And then Jim Zelke is principal of Cardinal Board Services. Actually, Jim and I, we think could possibly be related. We've been piecing things together. Zelke, not a common name, so we've been doing a little Ancestry.com stuff, and we've been trying to figure that out. So from southern Minnesota, the last name Zelke, we have to overlap there some way. Anyway, so I've interacted with our panelists over the years and appreciate them taking their time. And so why don't we start with Esperanza, and we'll just go down the list. Why don't you all take a couple minutes just to give folks some background on yourself.
Is this on? Yep, okay. I am a consultant working mainly with privately owned companies that want to have what I call an exceptional board of directors. So I have created a process to build a board from scratch, and I have 3-step process. Usually it takes about 2 to 4 months, the whole process. My clients usually come to me because they have very ambitious growth plans, and they know that they don't have the resources available inside the company to achieve those goals. So they hire me to do it. I count as clients very large companies of financial, like $5 billion in assets, also very promising startup companies. I have been creating board of directors for the last 20 years, and I bring to my consulting practice that I have been an entrepreneur myself. I have been a management consultant to hundreds of companies. I was like Rick, a venture capital investor, so I invested in a lot of entrepreneurial companies all over the United States. I was a CEO for almost all my time when I was working, and reported to very sophisticated board of directors. I have served myself on more than 40 board of directors of public, private, and nonprofit organizations. My clients really love me because they know that I am very uniquely qualified to do that because I have been seated where they have been, as a CEO. I understand the job of the CEO, but I also understand the job of the directors. Finally, I want you to know that I only work with a few clients a year, a handful of clients. I teach corporate governance in the Executive MBA at St. Thomas. I currently serve on 2 private companies' board of directors and 2 nonprofit. And I coach executives who wants to be excellent directors. In closing, I want you also to know that I only work 24/7, 24 hours a month, 7 months a year, and I hope that will be a commitment that you have, so in your later years, that's what you are aiming for. Thank you.
That's great.
All right.
There you go. Well, I just met Esperanza here, but I totally believe that her customers love her. Don't you? I totally believe that. My name is Jim Hickey. I am currently CEO of Fraxis, Inc., which is a clinical stage medical device company. My whole career has been in medical devices or medical software or healthcare data. I started with American Hospital Supply many, many years ago and have been CEO of 2 public and 3 private medical device companies. I was doing a little bit of research here. I've sat on 13 boards of directors, 4 of them currently, all in those particular areas. The companies have been a good mix of public, private, and nonprofit, and thoroughly enjoyed it. Really looking forward to this. Delighted to be here. Rick asked us to tell one quick story, and the first board meeting I ever attended was my first day as a CEO. I'd never been to a board meeting. So my only goal was to not make anybody regret hiring me, right? Anyway, the meeting went real well, and one of the board members, who was Larry Lemkuhl, does that name ring a bell? Larry was CEO of St. Jude Medical here for many years, and a great guy. He pulled me aside after the meeting, and he said, "You did good because you didn't screw anything up." He said, "But I'm going to give you a little piece of advice." And the piece of advice is, as a CEO, don't ever ask a board what to do, because they'll tell you. Said, and there are 7 of us here, so the best you can do is you can make one of us happy and piss off 6. He said, so you always come to a board meeting and you tell us what you think you want to do and why it makes good sense to the company, and then we'll debate that. He goes, and what I'll do for you, as long as what you say makes sense and it has a good chance, I will back you. And I've told that to CEOs for years, don't ask a board what to do, but I've refined it a little bit as I've learned, and one of the things I've seen in boards that works very well is if the CEO knows that, 6 months, 9 months down the road, he or she is thinking of an acquisition, for an example. You square off some time at a board meeting and you tell everybody, I'm thinking about making an acquisition somewhere down the road. I'd like to go around the table and tell me what I should know. What are your experiences about acquisitions, good, bad, et cetera? And the beauty of that is you get to sit back and everybody tells you some incredibly valuable information, and you get to say thanks to everybody because there's no decision that has to be made right now. And it's a wonderful way to let everybody show off a little bit, right? And the CEO can get great information. You don't make anybody feel bad about it. And then 6, 9 months later, when you want to talk about acquisitions, you can thank the board for all their input and then move forward. So, valuable way to go. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Thanks.
Hey, Jim.
So in the sake of full disclosure, there's very few people who like De La Salle more than I do, and Sven is one of those folks. So we're both big De La Salle fans, and then Sven and I are also on a board together. So anyway, with that, Sven Werwin.
Very good. Thank you very much. Glad to be here. Can we get a quick show of hands? How many of you have been on or have been on a public board? Handful. How many have been on or on a private board currently? Okay. And how many on a not-for-profit board? Okay, so that gives us some sense of the mosaic of the audience. Sven Werwin, I've got roots here in Minnesota. I spent 10 years in New York as an investment banker, came back to Minnesota, CFO of 2 public companies, and then migrated about a decade ago into board work, which is what I've done exclusively. At the end of this month, I will have been on 8 public boards for a total of 56 years. So I've seen a lot of stuff. Companies sold, companies bought, companies go public, companies change management, et cetera. I'm an audit committee financial expert. That's how I've been able to lay claim to those opportunities. Today, I sit on 3 public boards: Proto Labs, $260 million in revenue, $2 billion market cap; SPS Commerce, $150 million in revenue, $1 billion market cap; Cogentix Medical, $50 million in revenue and $50 million market cap; 1 private company and 3 not-for-profits. And again, Rick, shout out to you for hosting these. These are great events. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Get your round of applause.
And Jim?
Tough group to follow, I can say that. One thought is if you see Sven's name come up as going to be on a board of a public company, buy the stock. Because every place he goes seems to do pretty well. So my story, my background is 25 years ago, I've got 2 careers, and 25 years ago, I was able to spoof my wife in letting me go do what I wanted to do instead of what I was doing. And we had 3 little kids at the time, and I said, don't worry, it'll be fine. Well, it turned out okay, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to go help people. And I started an executive search back 25 years ago, and did fairly well at it, and started my own firm after 5 years. And about 15 years ago, a trusted CEO that I knew my whole career asked me to do a board search for his public company. And I'd never done one before. And I said, okay, well, I can do this. And it was, what I learned was doing a search for a board member is not anything like doing a search for an executive. It's completely different. It's unique things that you look for. So then after that, another good friend of mine asked me to sit on his board of a private company. And so I did that for several years, and I learned what it was like then to be on the other side and live through it. My good friend is a fellow that people may or may not know in the room, Greg Palin. So Greg was the chairman of the board of Polaris, and he's on Valspar board, and he's been on a lot of other boards. And Greg took me aside, and he said, he showed me some other companies to go work with. He said, Jim, there's a gap here for private companies under $1 billion to have good functioning boards. You should develop a practice around that. And that's what I did. 5 years ago, Cardinal Board Services was founded, and we focus on helping private companies under $1 billion either build a board from scratch or go out and find people that they can add to their board that's going to help them go to the next level. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Fabulous panel today. If we were to add up all those years of board experience, it would be significant. So thank you all for being here. Anyway, first question, now I'd say that these events are supposed to be for you, so at any point if somebody's got a question, chime in. I have a list of questions that we'll kind of get going, but if somebody wants to jump in, just raise your hand and I'll try to get to you. First question for all the panelists is, what are the main reasons that a company should have a board? Whether it be, obviously on public, you have to, the fiduciary side, but advisory board, any good reason, what are the main reasons for a board being in place?
I'll go. As I thought about this question, I was reminded of an op-ed that I read many years ago by Tom Perkins of Kleiner Perkins Venture Capital fame. At the time, he was on the Hewlett-Packard board, and that was going through one of its series of agonies. That board has transitioned and screwed it up and come back again and screwed it up again and whatnot. But the op-ed he wrote framed a very, I thought, powerful argument about what a board should or should not do. He described two models. The one model he described as the compliance model. Check the boxes, Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, and all the things that need to be done. And his concern was that the momentum, the tide was shifting too much to that compliance model. The other model that he described, the one that he celebrates, is the guidance model, where you help a management team get to the next level, figure out what the competition's about, figure out how to create shareholder value, et cetera, et cetera. And he had a point of view, and he was very, very critical of the then Hewlett-Packard board that he sat on, including most specifically its chair. So as I think about board work, Rick, I think, in fact, the truth is somewhere in the middle. You have to be doing both compliance work. You don't have a choice. But spend too much time on compliance and not enough time on guidance, you're failing who you're working for.
Great answer. Anybody else?
So I'd like to pipe in. So just this week, I had coffee with a friend of mine, a successful CEO who just recently sold his business. And he said, Jim, that we had a great success, and I have to give you credit for part of it. I said, really? What was that? And he says, because when you and I met last, you had told me the importance of a board, and I listened closely to it. And he says, I put a board of advisors in place, which helped me immensely grow my business, fivefold, and be able to sell it. And I said, so what's the value you get out of the board? He says, it's pretty simple. By getting the 4 people I put on the board, he says, I had 80 to 100 years of experience at my fingertips. And diverse experience, but 80 to 100 years. And he says, I was 3 years into this job. He said, I had 3 years of experience. I wanted more experience. And that's really what he got out of his board.
Great. Esperanza, Jim? Either one?
Please.
Well, for my clients that are smaller private companies, they really want advice, access to experience, and also it's lonely at the top for these CEOs and entrepreneurs, so they want to have a safe environment where they can come and really share what keeps them awake at night. So it's pretty much what you are saying. The legal side now is becoming so, the compliance model is becoming really big now that it's taking a lot of time at the board level to make sure that the companies are are compliant with all the rules and regulations. So I think that has taken away time for board of directors to provide oversight, to challenge, to questions. I don't know what will be the solution for that because more and more regulations are coming. I believe that we are going to see even more in the near future. But I don't know what is the solution. But even for private companies, it's getting to be a lot to be on top of all the guidance, the compliance. But the main thing is to add value to the company, to make sure that the company is well run and that the CEO and the management team has a place to go to be challenged, questioned, and get suggestions.
Yeah, I'll throw just a couple other things in there. I agree with everything the panelists have said. I tell CEOs that not only is this great advice for you to have a board of directors, but you, as if you're going to be a really effective CEO, you need to have people who will challenge you, who you will listen to. Your management team is going to maybe challenge you, but you're the boss, right? So they're going to think twice about what they do. And when you choose board members, you want people on the board from whom you are willing to take advice, right? So during the interview process, there's got to be a little chemistry there, and we'll probably talk about chemistry later in the panel here, so that if somebody says, I think you're headed in the wrong direction, or I don't agree with that, it perks you to listen as opposed to kind of annoys you. So that's another great thing about a board.
All right, thank you.
Rick, could I add a footnote to that, though?
Yep.
I read occasionally that the problem with boards is nobody has the courage to stand up in the boardroom and challenge the CEO. That doesn't work. You can't embarrass the CEO in front of her peers, in front of his peers. There's a great line from Jen Romedy, who's the CEO of IBM. It's one of these stories that was written as she became the CEO of IBM. And the career advice she got early on was you can win privately or lose publicly. And I think that's great advice. If you really want to get after the CEO, it would be incredibly ineffective, stupid, and would reflect badly on everybody if you were to stand up and challenge Jim in front of everybody in the boardroom. That doesn't work, and anybody who thinks it does shouldn't be in a boardroom.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Win privately, lose publicly.
You can win privately or lose publicly.
All right. Okay, so Esperanza and Jim, how do you build a good board?
Well, I have a mantra, and that is that the board composition follows a strategy. So a board of directors has to be populated by people that somehow can help the company to achieve successfully the strategy they want. So that implies also that every so often the makeup of the board of directors has to change too, if the strategy changes. I had a client that it was a very promising startup company, and the two ladies that started the business wanted to position the company to be acquired. They didn't want to run the business. They thought they were too old. And so I put together a board of directors that met the strategy that they wanted. And the board was extremely successful because like in 3 years, the value of the company went up significantly. And these two ladies look at the company and how much money was at stake and how much, they never thought that they could be this successful. So they call me back and say, we have changed our mind. We don't want to sell anymore. And so they let go the board of directors that I have put together, and then I brought another board of directors that was a board of directors that knew how to grow the company internally and how these two ladies could be the best CEOs and CEO and get the company moving. So for me, that's important. I have something that I call MIMO, which is mediocre in, mediocre out. So if your board of directors are mediocre, you cannot expect to have an unbelievable result. So board composition for me is the most important thing that a board has to watch at all times to make sure that the quality, the qualification, the experience, and the chemistry, we were talking about chemistry, work for the companies so they can add value.
Great, thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll continue on that, the composition theme, I like to see people on a board who are very good at giving general business advice and good advice to the CEO to be more effective. You don't need board members who know all about your industry. You don't need product managers. You don't need people with really defined skills inside a business, because you're not hiring a management team, right? This is a board of directors. You don't want them to run the company. You want them to help guide the company. So I think that's one. I've been in the medical device field, and I've seen too often where the board wants to bring on, I say this with great respect, they want to bring on, say, a physician in the field. But the physician knows all about that particular product or procedure, but can't give the overall advice about when is it time to sell, when is it time to invest in manufacturing, et cetera. So make sure you get the skill set you want. And then secondly, the chemistry piece. I have sat on boards with marvelous chemistry, and there's nothing you can't do. And if the chemistry isn't there, the meetings are just tedious. And I think the best thing about chemistry is all the right information can show up, right? If people all get along, the sensitive things can show up. And they have to, as Sven said, they have to be presented in a sensitive manner. But if the CEO or the board is going to make a good decision, they've got to have all the right data there in front of them. So if you've got good chemistry, nobody's afraid to say, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. Or somebody could say, let me challenge that, which is one of Sven's great lines. You present something and Sven says, can I just challenge that a little bit? And so you have to say yes. You can't say no to that. And the chemistry, I think, is very important. The other one is you're with these people, you're talking about very sensitive things. It's nice if you like each other. It's nice if there's somebody there who can kind of lighten the mood with a little humor. You're together sometimes over meals, but you're wrestling with a lot of questions. And if there's good chemistry, it just makes the whole process flow better.
I have a point in that chemistry that I want to make, and that is, if you are on a board of directors where your chemistry doesn't work, get out. Because this is a very small community, and the least you want to have is people talking about how difficult you are at the board level. It is like, I have a couple of prospects that on paper, they are absolutely the best director that I could recruit for my clients. But I have the experience that they don't have the right chemistry to be in an environment to listen, to contribute. And so make sure that if you don't have the chemistry, fake it or leave it.
So put together a good board. What does it take? I think there's really three key components to doing this. The first off is you need to look to the future. Where do you want the organization to be 3 to 5 years? Oh, we want to double in revenue. Oh, we want to sell. Whatever it is that you can, the vision for the company is 3 to 5 years. Because that'll be your roadmap, like Esperanza said, is what's the strategy? So if you understand what that is, then you go to the next step. And the next step is something that people overlook a lot, and that is to properly structure the board. And bylaws is one of my favorite. When I work with a client, the first thing is, let me see your bylaws. And I've got a little cute kind of personal story of the importance of bylaws. My son came to me 2 years ago. He says, Dad, I'm thinking about moving in with my girlfriend. He said, what do you think? I said, well, you don't need my approval. He said, no, what do you think? I said, Adam, the moving in is the easy part. It's the moving out that's the hard part. 15 months later, the moving out was pretty hard. So, and this is so for example, bylaws. You need to know, as Esperanza was saying at the table, how do you get somebody off the board that doesn't work for you? How do you leave the board? The bylaws should say all that. The second thing is really, what are your expectations from your board members? Make sure you're clear about that. And what are your dreams? I mean, back in the day, you know, there's a lot of people that say they paint this big, beautiful dream that's not realistic. Make it be one that's being realistic. And then lastly is the commitment from the ownership group, the shareholders. You know, make sure they're committed to having this board, because it does take work. There's just no way around it. It takes work. It's good work. It's going to help your company be successful, but make sure there's a commitment. And then the last of the three pieces that you need to do is you need to recruit exceptional people. And I'll tell you a story. We did a search last summer for a company in Michigan, $700 million, they make bumpers for the auto industry. And they said, we need to get somebody new, some new blood on the board, and we need innovation. You know, we 90% of our revenue comes from making bumpers for the autos, and that's not going to go in the right direction. And they said, could you find us some board members? And one of them in particular, we want somebody around innovation. And I'm not sure if Eric's here, but the person we recruited to the board is the Chief Innovation Marketing Officer at 3M. I mean, 3M is innovation. And they never in their wildest dreams thought they could get something like this. You can get people like that. You just need to know what is it you want and then go out and find it.
Great, good advice. Sven, what dynamics do you see on a board when it's functioning effectively?
What I think about, Rick, when I think about that question is what is a board really supposed to do? And I guess I would leave you with just with 3 thoughts on that. One is it's the care and feeding, retention, recruitment of the CEO. None of us should run that business. None of us are, perhaps other than Jim, are qualified to run that business. So getting the right person in the corner office is really, really important. And I would say to you that's true of a public company, it's true of a private company, and it's equally true of the not-for-profits that I've touched over the years. So it's the number one thing a board should do. The second, if you're functioning effectively, is you're not creating strategy, but you're supporting and buying into strategy. That's what a board does. A board does not, as Jim indicated, it's not your job to create strategy. It's the management team's job to bring that straight to you, and then you as a board react, refine, trim around the edges, pose questions. But strategy is one of your primary responsibilities. And then the third thing we've already touched on, it's part of my balance comment, you are in the compliance business. You have to have an audit committee. That's my job. You have to file financial statements. You have to do this, you have to do that. So you have to be pretty good at that stuff. Compensation has become a really big deal, as disclosed in proxy statements, for instance, for public companies. So there's a whole compliance piece that you need to do well. Esperanza, I think the way to handle it so it works is you push all that down into the committees and do the heavy lifting for that kind of work in the committees and leave the guidance piece that I spoke of earlier for board meetings.
Great, thank you. So to all the panelists, what advice would you give business leaders for managing their board?
Okay.
Right.
Because I work with a private company that they haven't had board of director, and if they had was, you know, I have found some that even the pastor is sitting with the board because, you know, it's convenient for my client, but then they realize they need a good board. So when I come, it's like I come, you know, on a clean piece of paper that I can do my things. But it is mainly, the CEO has to understand what corporate governance is all about. It's not a choice to have a board of directors. The law requires that you have a board of directors. But you need to know how it works. You need to know what are the legal implications. You need to know what is this chemistry that so many of us talk about it. What is the strategy? What it is that you as a CEO have to do on your management team, and what it is that the board of directors has to do, and why. So I will let the others do more.
Yep, I agree. I'll give you one other one. I've been to too many board meetings over the years where the slides or the packet or whatever the information is virtually mirrors the management information. And it drives me a little crazy. And I tell CEOs, you need to put together information that a board needs to see. They don't need to see everything that your management team needs to see. And so you really got to think about that. I think one of the ways to manage a board correctly is to understand what is it a board has to see either to support a decision or to make a decision. And that's a little bit of an art. And if the packet is real thick, there's too much data in there. And if it's too thin, there's not enough. The second piece about, I think, effectively managing a board is just understanding we've all got our little peccadillos. There are going to be board members who will always say no matter what you give them, there's not enough information. And there are going to be board members who pull you aside afterwards for the same data and say, you know what, you gave me too much. And I did see one real-life example where I worked with a CEO, and in fact, his propensity was to always give way too much information. And so we worked with him to try to, and our solution eventually was, number one, you can't change the font to jam more information into the paper. But our solution was put together a board book, and then, if you have to, put together an appendix, and then send the appendix out. So those who want to dive deep, it's just nirvana for them. But the ones who don't can just ignore the appendix. And we actually had one board member who, when we did this, he said, well, I think all that appendix should be back in. And I pulled him aside afterwards, I was chairman, and said, it's like you're giving heroin to this addict. You know, you live with the appendix idea, and he did, and it all worked out well, so.
There you go. There you go. My point would be real quick. So look to your board as a resource. Use them, but then as Jim had said earlier, listen when they talk. That, you'll get the most value out of your board.
Rick, if I could,
It's all yours.
I like the word manage because it suggests intentionality. And I think that's really important for a CEO to manage his or her board and be very self-aware around that. Personal story that illustrates this for me, when I was still in the investment banking business and working for a firm where I had a relatively low-key boss, I said to a colleague, somebody like a Jim, and said, well, it's a good thing that Bill's not managing us. We know what we're doing. And Peter Kent, who was much wiser than I was, wagged his finger at me and said, Sven, everybody needs to be managed. So I think a CEO should be very intentional about managing her board and thinking about what the board needs and when they need it. Two quick examples. M&A. Everybody on the board feels like they know something about M&A. If you go to the board too early, you don't have enough information. If you go to the board too late, everybody squabbles and says, wait a minute, you're giving us this fully baked, we can't give you any input. So the art for the CEO is to come somewhere in between so that the board feels like she's doing the right thing by involving the board. Same thing with a year-end budget. This is budget season for me. I'm attending 5 budget meetings here in the next short while. Each of the CEOs that I'm working with has previewed or foreshadowed that budget so we get some sense of where she's going or what he wants. And then we have a meeting later in December where the budget gets approved. If she came to the meeting just with the budget, board, I want you to approve it today, you can imagine the pushback that she would get, and it wouldn't work well. So back, the lesson is manage your board.
Great, thank you. All right, so along those lines, what are some common mistakes that business leaders do when they're interacting with the board? Sen just gave us one on the timing of materials, but what are some other common mistakes that folks make?
I guess what this man just said, the information. You know, my experience also is that CEOs think that the more information you give, the better they look, because they look knowledgeable, they look, you know, like they are looking at everything under the universe to support whatever decision they want. But I also think that part of that is to keep the board busy. And so they are looking at information and going back and forth. There is very little time to discuss, you know, issues that are of interest to the board, you know, the future, the strategy, how is it working, how is the competition, how are we doing? Because you have this mammoth of information that is, and then you always have board members that go to the page 99. I added those numbers and they don't tie, which is another way, but because they want to show that they are thorough, you know, that they have read all the material. So finding one little piece that didn't work. So that's a mistake for me, you know, keeping the board busy in things that are not relevant to the work that the board should be doing. And I think in many cases is CEO and management team that don't want to give the board too much time to get involved in other things.
I agree. I'll throw one in. Sven alluded to it earlier. I really encourage a very good committee system. You know, have a good audit committee, a compensation committee, maybe a governance committee that in smaller companies can also serve as the nominating committee when you want to change members. But Sven's term was heavy lifting, and I agree. There are things you just don't want to debate at the board level, but you can debate them all day at a committee meeting, because you can have 2 or 3 management people present, you can ask for additional data, you can all kinds of things until the committee arrives at what they think is the best for the board, and then the committee presents that information at the board meeting succinctly, because it's a board committee reporting to the balance of the board. So that hopefully they're going to be pretty good at letting the board know exactly what they need to know. But I've been part of really effective committee systems, and it's a little bit of a joy. You can really dive as deep as you want, but you think it through. So I think one of the things that companies don't do often enough is really, really try to have a good committee structure.
I think some of the recent statistics are something over 50% of Standard & Poor's 500 companies have a combined chairman and CEO. What's your opinion of that? What is the direction things are going, and what's healthy for a company?
I will tell you that for my clients that are private company, and usually the owner of the company is my client, all of them agree with me that the chairperson should be somebody else. But it is because I tell them what is the chair's role. That the chair role is to run the meeting, make sure that everybody participates in setting the agenda, making sure that everybody participates, and if somebody on the board of directors is not participating, the chair should call that board member, why aren't you participating, is there anything else? So it's not like the perceived idea that the chair is the boss to the CEO. So once my clients understand what is the role of the chairperson, they are comfortable in doing it. But I did run into one problem once, that there was a big legal issue with the company. And I discovered that the chairperson that my client has selected was talking to the press like he was the spokesperson for the company. Well, needless to say, he's no longer the chairperson in the company either. But that is in the private company. In the public company, I guess Ben might be better qualified to say it. But
The question was the separation of the chair role from the CEO role, particularly in public companies. I think you have to segment the data. For the larger companies, the S&P 500, which you referenced, who are under tremendous scrutiny, there is clearly lots of pressure to separate those roles. There was a huge trend separating them. I think the trend has actually been arrested. In other words, not as many companies are making that move. And the smaller companies where I've made my living, if you will, the historical NASDAQ companies, emerging growth, it's not as big a deal, in part because the companies are not as much in the limelight, but we talk about it regularly. There's ego involved. There's how do we herd the cats kinds of issues. So I don't think there's any one declarative statement that one could make today around that issue.
So let me repeat it for everyone. So how do you compensate people on your board, especially in a private company? And the truth of the matter is there is no standard. And I did a little research this morning before I came, and I looked up, there's 2 public companies here in Minnesota, same size. The average board compensation on company number 1 is $172,000 a year. These are billion-dollar-plus companies. The average compensation on the second company was $46,000 a year. And by the way, the company that had the $46,000 a year of compensation has a 2x market cap with the other company. So is it the size of there's no rhyme or reason. But I would say that look at it, if you're a small private company, look at it from the opposite side. Say, should I compensate? Yes, I should. What's the amount of value of this person's time? Not so much how much value you give me, because you might give me a lot of value, a little value, but this person, if you just do basic math, you can come up with a way to say, I can justify paying this person, X amount of dollars, because their time is valuable. And if you don't pay them, they tend to go somewhere else, because at some point they only have a limited amount of time in their schedule to spend, especially if you want their full attention at board meetings, between board meetings. So don't be afraid to compensate, but you don't have to think it's going to cost you a lot of money to compensate, because, you know, some people pay their board members $5,000 a year and get a lot of value out of them in a small private company. Some pay $80,000 and get a lot of value out of them. It's what's comfortable for your company and work with the people.
Can I?
Esperanza, this is yours.
Yeah, because when they hire me, my clients, and that's one piece that I do. I recommend to my client how much they have to pay to the board members, how many meetings a year, what is the structure of the board. You can get information mainly for public company, but there are some research done for private company. So you can go and compare small public companies and get a feel for what you should do. I like what Jim says, that, you know, you think about the person, how much, if you are paying, my way to tell my clients when they are a little not so receptive to paying, I say how much you pay to your legal counsel. And we know that legal counsels are expensive, so what about your tax person? What about your CPA? Once they look at how much they are paying per hour to people that are doing a very specific job, not really impacting the whole company. So I use those, the size of the company, the complexity of the business, and the quality of the people that I am attracting. And I like to propose not only that my clients pay a fee per meetings, but also that on a monthly basis, I like my company to send a check, which is a little reminder, and I believe that if you get a check every month from a company, in a way, is a reminder that you are working and helping this company, and you should think about it. What did I do for this company this month? And they are sending me this beside my fee to go to the board of directors. But there is no one rule. I mean, it's all over the map, and people like to be on board of directors. That's another thing that is just, you know, you can get sometimes cheaper.
I've just gone through a live example of this. When I joined this one board that I'm on now, 4 years ago, we were $40 million in revenue, 2 basic product categories, and all the business was in the United States. There'll be $120 million this year, operate in 6 different countries. I've made 3 acquisitions in the meantime. And so as we started having people cycle off, and by the way, one thing I always recommend is have terms for your board members so that you don't have to bring up one day, hey, it's time for you to go. Make sure that the terms are up. So my term's up in 4 years. But one of the things we talked about was, if we're now operating this way, as people come off, we need a different kind of board member. We need some international experience. We need lots of things that we didn't have before, and so we looked at what we were paying and said, you know what, those people won't come here for that. So we did a couple of survey things, but one of the things that we all did to kind of get our heads around was, and there are 5 people on the board, we said, well, if we look at the talent assembled here and we decided to bring this person in as an employee, what would the cash compensation be? You know, and it was, you know, well over $200,000. We said, okay, so if we are getting this, I mean, that might be what we want to look at in terms of overall cash compensation for this body for the year, or at least a way to figure out what the amount could be. And so we put together a good program and have brought in 2 great board members since then. So that was a way just to figure out, you know, why the change and about what should the amount be.
Your question next, but the wild card in your question is equity, right? So is there equity involved, stock or options?
That's a
In a family company, perhaps that's not available because the family's not going to invite that opportunity. But that would be the real toughie.
For a company under 100 million, let's say, that was trying to break that mark, what would be a good frequency for board meetings that would be reasonable for compensating them for?
I'd say 4 to 5 times per year.
I would
No
say
more than
4
that.
to 6. Every other month will be ideal.
And if you're going to have a full board with committees, so the committees might meet oftentimes in between those meetings. So the person's involvement, they're going to be involved at least every other month to maybe even more than that if they're on a committee or part of a task force.
30 seconds, a few nuggets to leave.
Learn about what corporate governance is. If you are thinking either to have your board of directors for your company, or if you are thinking about, I want to be a director. It amazes me how little a lot of people that approach me that they want to be on a board of directors know what it is to be a director. They just know that you get paid, you go to 6 meetings and be in a committee, but don't have any idea about the legal responsibility the board of directors assume the minute that they sign. So that's probably the best for me.
I'll just give a slant on that, and it's just that if you're a CEO, it's great to have a board if you have the right board, right? Because you get wonderful advice and experience. And if it's not the right board, then it's your job to begin to change that out. But I would not want to run a company without a board of directors. It's wonderful advice, and they're there just for you.
I was on the board of a company called Compellent, run by Phil Soren, a tech executive many of you may know of. And Phil was making conversation with me one day. He said, Sven, who's the best director you ever worked with? What does that mean? The easiest to work with? The person who shows up the most often? The person that writes the biggest check? That's a really, in some ways, profound question. Who was the best director you've ever worked with? My answer today would be 3 E's: experienced, engaged, and effective.
So if you have a board, if you're on a board, most people think your job in the board is to represent the shareholders. It's really, think about stakeholders, not shareholders. So there's 5 major stakeholders in every organization. There's the shareholders, there's your employees, there's your customers, there's your suppliers, and oftentimes there's the community. All 5 of those want to see the company be successful. So think about stakeholders when you're putting your board together to make sure that they're represented correctly.
But I have a piece of advice. By law, in Minnesota, the main responsibility that director have is toward the company, not the stakeholder, not the shareholders, is to the company. So make sure that whatever decision you make as a member of a board is for the best of the company. If you think about Enron, and I have done a lot of research on Enron, none of the directors went to Yale, none, after so much fiasco. And it was because they could prove that they did the best for the company, they got the best advice available to them, and the best consultant telling them whatever the company wanted to do is okay. So remember this, in Minnesota is by law, your duties is toward the company. There are 2 exceptions to the rule. One is in bankruptcy, your loyalty is to the debtors, to the one the company owes. And if the company is for sale, then your loyalty is to the shareholders because you are required by law to get the best price for them.
All righty. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, panelists.